Hi, my name is Mbali and I'm here with Paki and Ketsia. We're talking about something that is very topical in the world of social media where there's so much information that floods at us. We can sometimes lose the plot. We lose the plot by sending out fake information or fake news. We've seen the prevalence of fake news on social media in so many cases, and as much as such platforms can be used for positive uses, they can also be used for things that could affect us negatively. And so we're talking about disinformation, and I want to talk to you specifically, Paki, as a content creator. I want to really know, what do you think the role is of a content creator in ensuring that they're informing their audience with the correct information?
It's weird because there's like two schools of thought. Because as a content creator, you want views, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the stuff that goes viral is when you like tip away from the truth. But I guess you also have to be honest and with your audience. And if you tell them like what is actually going on instead of like pivoting towards, because you always get the sense of like, I could slightly change it and I would slightly get variety. But like, I think ultimately, if you're looking for longevity, you actively have to, speak facts, and people actually rely on you and see you as a thought leader. But it's an interesting contrast that you try and figure out, and you don't really want to be dishonest, but then you look at your numbers and you're like,
what can I do to just shift the needle a
just
bit?
a bit. Maybe insinuate, but then you have to come back and be like, no. In the long term, they won't trust me, and this will be more bad than good.
Exactly. I think you're highlighting the responsibility that comes with having to be a disseminator of information and news, right? And for you, from a perspective of someone who consumes news, what do you think the role of social media is in consumption of news? And as an audience as well, how can you become more media literate, so to speak?
I think social media, the pioneering thing about it is the fact that it's accessible. Like, it's very easily accessible, and that's why people are quick to go onto social media for news feed, for information. I think it has a role of informing people. It has a responsibility of informing people of the facts and the truth. However, it's hard now with the implementation of AI, as well as what content creators have to juggle. But also, I want to say pop culture, or how people communicate on different social media platforms. For instance, X. I'm no longer on X, but I know that on X,
formerly known as Twitter.
Yes, formerly known as Twitter. I know that on X, a lot of people share their own opinions about news, about current affairs. And sometimes the languaging that's used in relation to different news happenings in the world influences how people think. Could be an example of disinformation. So I think empowering yourself would be looking at other sources outside of social media platforms.
100%.
Like people, productions or publications with historical policy kind of thing around like news delivery, whether it be newspapers, as much as those things are not things people engage with as much anymore, or other magazines that have online presence as well for accessibility.
That's it. I was actually going to bring up the point around how can we look at more credible sources of information, right? Because what we've also been seeing specifically in the South African landscape is that some smaller publications who can bend their ethics a little bit lift and shift information from credible sources, and then they repost it on their pages because what they want the virality, they want the views, they want the following. So how can we then equip ourselves as individuals, as someone who creates for audiences? How do you think your audiences can equip themselves so that they're more alert, more aware of what is fake and what is not?
It's a weird one because I have a bit of a controversial take, because I feel like it's somewhat also the responsibility of the people. Because like if they could somewhat reward such behavior, such honesty, because currently on the internet and the landscape is, if you breed negativity, if you slight a bit, you are somewhat rewarded. So if people can be like, now we are not going to tolerate misinformation, and actually take the necessary step to somewhat cancel the people that are intentionally putting out disinformation. So I think it needs to be a collaborative effort from both the creators and the consumers.
Yes.
Now it's like if I keep messing up and doing the same thing and I'm somewhat pat on the back for it, I'll continue to exhibit that type of characteristic. So I think there needs to be a conscious shift from both the creators and the consumers.
Yeah, and I think the phrase that might capture that is shared responsibility for me, right? Yeah. Responsibility from a consumer, responsibility from the creator as well, because ultimately, as the consumer, you do want to enjoy, number one, the content that you consume, but also you want to ensure that it is the right information and you can also pass it on, because we tend to do that, right? But as a creator, if you're considering, your creation as a source of income and a source of growing your brand and visibility, it also does come with those long-term effects and long-term actions that show your level of responsibility. So I just want to talk about maybe where you consume your news from currently.
Social media.
Which platforms? Which platforms? Because honestly, I hear so many people quoting TikTok when you're in conversation and they're referring to something that they say like, I saw this TikTok that said this and that and that, and they're almost quoting that as if it's factual. And there's a risk to that.
I think the nice thing about TikTok, or what it got right, is like it makes the information exciting and easy to digest. Like the content creators display news with such like passion and so people are more likely to scroll and go down that rabbit hole. I also consume most of my information from TikTok, but it depends also on your rabbit hole. It can be quite detrimental, because if you go into an echo chamber, if you like something, the algorithm reads, it might be this information, but you're more leftist, so it's going to keep on giving you that one perspective. So it becomes harmful, but that's where I consume most of my information.
The goal is to keep you on the platform.
Yes, that's
also the thing. That's the hidden agenda. They want every platform.
They're buying your attention, right? And like you said, which is a very valid point, is that because there's an algorithm and some machine learning in the background, even if you are consuming information that isn't true, it'll keep sending you that information, right? And that's where, unfortunately, you might not be able to draw the line and know what's real and what isn't for you. And for you, where do you consume your information?
I've never...
News specifically.
Okay, news specifically. I've never really been a TikToker, so not TikTok. I don't really have like the very popular social medias at the moment anymore. Used to be Instagram. That was actually very accessible for me. And I followed a lot of news publications on Instagram, and then that would lead you to, hopefully if you're interested in reading more, to the article or whatever that's being spoken about on the actual website. So now again, with that consumers empowering themselves and having agency over the kinds of information, now that I don't have those social media platforms, which was a conscious decision of mine, I have to now go to the website, actively check what is happening in the world today.
And I mean, it does take that conscious effort, right? But not everybody navigates, their news consumption or information consumption in that way. So I mean, for anybody who doesn't consume their information that way, I think again that responsibility of vetting and figuring out credibility is important.
It becomes hard because we seek comfort. We like things that are easy, easily
creatures of
accessible.
habit, convenient.
Convenient. I'm not going to go out of my way to like, okay, no, this could be wrong, but let me go down and research. So it's like the first thing I pick up, I'm going to go tell the next person.
Without even going down to the level of the comments sometimes,
Like, did you hear? I think X is actually trying to take a good initiative with community notes. Like when you let's say publish something that has like misinformation, disinformation, there's community notes that will be like, actually
that is not true.
It will keep your headline or whatever, but they'll break down why it's not true, and like they'll say something like this article or topic is deceitful because it's highlighting this. So interesting.
I think you bring up a very important point as well. Another responsibility on the platforms that we consume this information from, right? So not only is it the consumer, the creator, but now we need to consider the platforms, because again, if you are hosting the information that is being shared, there's also a responsibility to be spoken
Yeah.
about at that level.
I think it does well because it doesn't censor the individual, because it still leaves the freedom of speech elements of it, but still criticize.
That's
So
it.
it's like you can
and creates that level of
Yeah.
media literacy.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
you can display what you're saying, but
I want to talk about something I think you touched on a bit earlier around AI. And I think a little bit of what X is doing with the community notes may also be AI generated, if I'm not mistaken. So in the age of artificial intelligence and deepfakes, guys, you go on these platforms and you see AI generated images, etc. Again, the conversation around media literacy comes into play. How have you seen this unfold in your spaces, in your community? Have you seen like some virality around AI generated content or information?
I know a lot of content creators are using like AI to generate scripts and get information.
Okay.
But also there was a bit of controversy where they were saying like the chat box or whatever biased to a certain extent. I remember earlier on when ChatGPT was still being developed, people were like saying whenever you asked let's say a more right person, it will give you only negative reviews and so I think it's still real time, and we're still trying to figure out what's real and what's not, because AI is machine learning, and it takes every information it knows and it gives you this, and it's hard for you to say, nah, this is wrong, but sometimes there is kind of mistakes within the algorithm. But I don't know if we have a concrete answer with where that's going to go.
I also don't think so.
Act. I think it's a real balancing act. I'm in the creative economy as well, but more so in the theater space. So that is live performance, but it is also scripting. It is also creative output, essentially. And I know that there are some writers who are using AI to write their own scripts, or using AI to plan shoots, like location, what would be cool for this script, where is this set, that kind of thing. And I'm not opposed to it at all, but it's because it's so new and it's happening in real time, as you said. You're kind of juggling your trust in it, I suppose, with the convenient aspect of it as well, and its efficiency. It is efficient,
very efficient,
so that we can't deny. It's a balancing act at the moment.
Definitely a balancing act. But I think, from a media literacy perspective, there isn't a conclusive way to be able to identify and see how information is generated, or if it's from AI or it was generated by humans. But I think another point that's coming up for me right now is that, especially in the creative space, guys, the preservation of creativity and the preservation of like facts and everything requires human intervention more than anything for me. So how do you think then the risk of disinformation is affecting public discourse and our society at large? And especially if we talk about things like, the elections, we talk about, topical news events. How do you think disinformation really just affects our process of decision making?
Like if you think something is not what it is, it can somewhat like shift the whole trajectory of your plans, what you're doing, whether it be content, livelihood, economics. So it's not just one facet, but it's the whole. Like if you get one single thing wrong, the whole domino will fall. So I think just if we can find a way to map out, or like get the community to actively, like I said initially, punish people that deviate from the norm, because I feel, or I believe it affects every facet of your life.
That's it. And it affects every facet of our society, right? Especially when it comes to making big decisions, when it comes to politics, for example. You're making a life-changing decision. You're making something that is going to affect the livelihood, the economy, the state of democracy, and public discourse at large. So I don't know if you have any closing words for our discussion just around responsibility, misinformation, and also from a creators, I'm looking both sides, perspective.
My question to you is, what do you think sparked the general distrust of like media? What do you think was the genesis of all this?
So I don't necessarily think that there was a distrust in media, but rather a rise in digital consumption and digital media. And because of that, people leaned towards more relatable type of content. And when you think about relatability, you're thinking about somebody that looks like me, right? So you would relate to somebody that looks like you, has the same interest as you, and possibly that could have been the thing that created a form of distance rather than distrust. I think it's more distance than distrust from like media outlets, you know, because they're still there, and they still serve a very important purpose. But there seems to have been a distance between the audience and these media outlets versus us having to consume information from a Paki, for example, you know. So there needs to be some form of closeness that needs to be created, like some bridge, exactly. I love that. A reconstructed unity where we also just able to uphold the role of media outlets and the importance that they play, because they're still there, and we still look to them for verifying our information and for figuring out if things are credible or not, meaning that they still hold a very important part of public discourse. So yeah, I love that reconstructed unity. We need to come together and unite as one.